Welcome to Human Monsters. This is part 2 of the child abuse series. The torture of Lauren Kavanaugh by the parents from hell, Ken and Barbie Atkinson. Warning: be advised that this episode contains mature themes. More importantly, it contains graphic descriptions of the neglect and physical, sexual, and emotional abuse of children that some may find disturbing. The life of Lauren Kavanaugh is a tragedy, with even the term Shakespearean being inadequate as an adjective. She is now in her mid-20s. For 6 years, from the age of 2 until she was 8, Lauren was confined to a closet by her mother and stepfather. She was rarely fed by them, nor was she permitted to use the bathroom. When she was removed from the closet, she was used as a human punching bag or as a sexual plaything. She was rescued when a tip from one of the couple's friends was given to the police. If you find this story as disturbing in the introduction, you will find the details even more shocking. Lauren Kavanaugh suffers from destabilizing mental health disorders. It's part of the fallout from having been raised by human monsters. Lauren's story attracted media attention first at the time of her rescue, when she was dubbed the girl in the closet. Her story was covered in depth years later regionally in a segment on the Dallas Morning News and nationally on the Dr. Phil Show. This episode contains clips from those appearances. Lauren Kavanaugh was born on April 12, 1993 in Athens, Texas. Unlike with many mothers, this was not a joyous birth for Barbara Calhoun. After the labor pains got serious, Barbie Calhoun, grabbed the hand of her best friend of the moment, that being Sabrina Kavanaugh, who would one day grow to despise Barbie. This birth was to change the destinies of both women, albeit in completely different ways. Sabrina and her husband were anxious to adopt a child. Calhoun had recently moved in with one of Sabrina's relatives and was anxious to put up a child for adoption. After all, her situation was hardly ideal for a child. She was living out of the front seat of a Chevy pickup truck. She was 21 years old and a mother of a toddler, aside from being 4 months pregnant. Describing the verbal agreement, Sabrina said, "We went over there and talked to her for like 2 or 3 hours. She was certain she wanted to give it up. She didn't even know who the father was." Sabrina was as involved with the pregnancy as one can be without actually bearing the child herself. She drove Barbie to every medical appointment, 3 hours of driving every time, from Ennis to Maybank to Athens. Sometimes she sat nearby in the hallway as Barbie was quizzed by nurses or doctors who wanted to ensure that she wasn't being forced to give up custody. Barbie would act as though she wanted to keep the baby, which Sabrina interpreted as a ruse. Sometimes she acted like she didn't want to give the baby up, but you could tell it was a put-on. She was wanting sympathy. She was like, "I want to keep her, but I don't have a job and I don't have anywhere to stay." And the adoption, just makes more sense. Once light labor began, the Kavanaughs met Calhoun at East Texas Medical Center in Athens. They spent the next few hours holding her arm and encouraging her as she paced back and forth in the hallway in front of her room, trying to instigate the contractions. Though she initially refused pain medication, she soon demanded it. Sabrina recalled this moment with amusement. "I was holding her hand and listening to her cuss and scream, and I was like, 'Oh Lordy, better you than me.'" When Lauren was born, Calhoun rolled over on her side and looked away from her. She refused to hold her. She wanted nothing to do with this child. It had already been settled. This was Sabrina's child. The next morning, the adoption papers were signed. Kavanaugh fed Lauren for the first time. Some of Sabrina's relatives were marveling at Lauren while taking photos. Barbie appeared in the doorway. There were tears in her eyes. Kavanaugh asked Barbie if she wanted to hold Lauren. Barbie shook her head. "You sure?" Barbie turned and walked out of the room without saying a word. The next morning it was time to bring Lauren home, and Sabrina sat in the back seat with Lauren. That was the happiest day of our lives. We loved her before she was born, I guess you would say. We had a room for her and little clothes. It was awesome. The following 8-month period was a magical time for Sabrina and her husband, Bill.
We brought her home and we just played with her and, all that good stuff. We were like happy.
She recalls the details with delight. Pink onesies, lacy little shoes, dimpled cheeks, toothy grins, being called Dada and Mama, and pulling up on little eggs filled out by baby fat. Things were going so well at the Kavanaugh homestead. Then one day the phone rang, the call that changed everything. It was always in the back of my head that Barbie could change her mind at any moment, Sabrina said. That fear was always there. Then her attorney called and said she was filing a petition to take Lauren back. A year-long custody battle began with this call. Sadly, for all three Kavanaghs, it was Barbie's to win. A lawyer the Kavanaghs hired to process the adoption neglected to file the paperwork with the state. The Kavanaghs were mystified. Barbie couldn't even bring herself to look at Lauren when she was born. Why did she suddenly have a change of heart and want her back? Doris Calhoun, Barbie's adoptive mother, opined, Barbie had an absolute right to change her mind. A mother who makes a choice to give up a child has not abandoned that child. It is a loving choice. That's a caring choice. It's a wonderful choice, and she is a great person to have made that choice. Calhoun went on to say that her daughter felt betrayed by the Kavanaghs after Lauren was born. Once the custody papers were signed and the social worker left the scene, the Kavanaghs ran out of the room to see the baby without delay. Barbie sat in her room for 10 or 15 minutes and thought, "What have I done?" Barbie became increasingly angry and despondent. She called the Kavanaghs. As Doris recalled, she called them at home and left word on their answering machine that she had changed her mind. They called back and said, "Go get a lawyer." Doris got involved. She had worked as a paralegal. She got a hold of the case file, hired an attorney, and researched the relevant laws deeply. That was when she discovered the gap that was left by the Kavanaugh's lawyer, the missing document that became Lauren's one-way ticket to hell. If Barbie wanted Lauren back, she was within her rights to take her. It was a happy year for Barbara for another reason. Barbie married a Ken, literally. Kenneth Atkinson, that is. He had been an old friend of Barbie's from high school. Custody was granted to Barbie gradually. Initially, the judge awarded Barbie visitations, but eventually this ruling was reversed, and primary custody was awarded to Barbie, with the Kavanaughs visiting on weekends. According to court documents filed at this time, it was the only occasion when Lauren enjoyed a happy home life with Barbie and her stepfather Ken. Photos show birthday parties, wagon rides, and Barbie playing patty cake with Lauren on the living room floor. In 1995, a traveling judge from Houston County, Lynn E. Markham, awarded permanent custody to Barbie. The Kavanaughs objected to this ruling on the grounds that when they received her for the weekend, her body presented with signs of abuse, scrapes, bruises, diaper rash, and fire ant bites were seen all over her body. Sabrina was understandably alarmed, but these were the least troubling symptoms. One afternoon when Sabrina prepared to change Lauren's diaper, Lauren started kicking and screaming, which had never happened before. When Sabrina finally managed to remove the diaper, she was deeply shocked by what she found inside. It was blood red from front to back, she said. I don't think it was diaper rash. I think Kenny was already sexually abusing her because she wouldn't let us touch that diaper. The Kavanaughs took action. They drove Lauren to Children's Medical Center Dallas for a sexual abuse evaluation. They said doctors would not perform a rape kit examination unless they were absolutely sure she had been abused. As Sabrina recalled, They said the test would have been very hard on her, and it would have been painful. Our hands were tied, really. There wasn't anything we could do. What they did end up doing was take 45 photographs, which they submitted as evidence of the abuse. This only angered Judge Markham, Sabrina said. He said, "You're doing more harm to this baby with all these pictures than that mother is ever going to do." I will never forget the day he said that. Ever. Despite his indignation about the photos, Judge Markham was more circumspect about the written judgment he submitted on January 6, 1995. He said that the Kavanaghs were clearly the better parents, but in order to take Lauren from her birth mother, they would have to prove Lauren would probably be harmed if she were raised by Barbie. Markham further said that the Kavanaugh's attorney never provided evidence or expert testimony that Lauren's scrapes and bruises were evidence of child abuse. If they had, his decision might have been different. As he remarked, the real basis of the Kavanaugh's cases rests upon their belief that the cumulative effect of all their testimony indicates that the child will be injured in the future. This is merely a statement of opinion. It is not supported by any evidence. Indeed, many children move often, grow up in unkempt homes, receive less than optimal supervision, have frequent injuries, and have some degree of diaper rash. However, the court cannot conclude that these conditions will significantly impair the child's physical health or emotional development. If only he had known how tragically inaccurate this prediction was. Doris Calhoun, like many mothers of criminals, failed to see a dark side in Barbie. Every time they came to my house, Barbie and Kenny would sit on our couch, and there'd be kids crawling all over them, on their backs, and hugging and kissing on them. And Lauren was a part of that. She wasn't standing off in the corner. She was part of the crew. Calhoun admitted that Barbie had flaws. She was lazy. She was a thief. She was a con artist. Still, when it came to her children, Doris could only discern tenderness. There were always problems around Lauren. Despite losing in court, the Kavanaghs would not let her go. They volunteered to babysit every weekend. They bought clothes and toys for her. They still referred to themselves as Mommy and Daddy when talking to her. This nettled Doris Calhoun. The problem wasn't that Barbie got her back. It was the fact the Kavanaghs never left. They broke the parent-child relationship, so it was never established strongly like it should have been. That's what happened between Lauren and Barbie. Judge Markham is now an attorney in Palestine. He became aware of Lauren's story years later, and he has pondered the implications of the decision he made that altered Lauren's fate in the most horrific possible way. His statement doesn't suggest that he is troubled by the endangerment he subjected Lauren to. I often wished there was another way to interpret the law, but I just didn't think there was. I had to do what I had to do. The Kavanaghs didn't see Lauren for another 6 years. Their last moment with her, until that time, was on December 26, 1994, when Lauren was 20 months old. By that time, Barbie had given birth to her third child, separated from her husband, and moved out of her mother's house. The Kavanaghs met Barbie in a Walmart parking lot in Jasper, located in East Texas. With a heavy heart, Sabrina walked over to Barbie's pickup with Lauren at her hip. She handed Barbie a scrap of paper with phone numbers. She kissed Lauren on the forehead as a final gesture of goodbye and let her go. She took one last swing at persuading Barbie to let her keep Lauren. "If you ever change your mind," she pleaded, "it doesn't matter where you're at, call collect and I'll come and get her." What the Kavanaghs didn't know was that Barbie, ever the con artist, drove her truck around back of the Walmart once they were out of sight. Why? That was where she lived, with all 3 of her children. It was years later, in 2001, and for weeks, Kenneth Atkinson had been referring to something he called Barbie's little secret. Nobody took him seriously. He had a reputation for being the kind of guy who talked a lot but offered very little in the way of substance. These people were his neighbors at the Pebble Creek Mobile Home Park in Hutchins, Texas. They assumed that Barbie may have been growing marijuana in the back bedroom, or perhaps other drugs and related paraphernalia. Drug possession was far from uncommon in trailer parks. One neighbor, Jeannie Rivers, was neither concerned nor impressed when Kenneth told her on the evening of June 11, 2001, "There's something I need to show you inside the trailer," as they stood outside in the early evening watching their kids ride bicycles in circles. Something about Kenneth's demeanor caught Jeannie's attention. He seemed disheveled and stressed. He looked like he couldn't wait to get something off his chest. Jeannie prattled on as she followed Atkinson down a hallway in his trailer to the master bedroom, where he walked directly to the closet. He swept aside a basket overflowing with dirty laundry, removed a few coat hangers from the doorknob, and opened the closet's door. "Hi, Lauren," he said. Jeannie was dumbstruck. She fell silent. She wasn't entirely sure that the creature huddling at her feet was human. As Jeannie reflected, what I pictured was a monster, a little bitty monster. She was so frail and without color. Her arms, they appeared to be no bigger than an inch wide to me. She was naked. Lauren looked up at her. She didn't speak. One of her eyes was crusted shut, secreting some kind of yellowish green substance. The other eye was partially closed. Her skin was pale and lifeless, characteristics you might normally ascribe to a cadaver. "It scared me," Jeannie said. "That makes me feel so bad that I was scared, but that's why I didn't reach down and grab her and run like I should have." Jeannie had questions for Kenneth, lots of them. Why is she naked? Do you hug her? Do you hold her? Do you feed her? Does she know she's loved? Kenneth finally replied, "I do when Barbie lets me." He wrapped his arms around Jeannie and closed the closet door. Jeannie reflected years later. It was worse than that I've seen for a Holocaust victim. It was that devastating. I'd never seen anything that bad on TV, and I just didn't know what to do. After the closet door shut, something clicked inside of Jeannie Rivers. She remembered when she was introduced to Kenneth. He introduced her to 5 of his children and vaguely referred to a girl named Lauren. He said she lived with her father. On another occasion, Jeannie asked the Atkinsons during a joint family cookout how they managed to feed all their children. Kenneth initially replied with food stamps, and then launched into a story about Lauren. Jeannie had yet to meet her, and Kenneth referred to her as the ghost child. Barbie shot him a look and finished his sentence. She informed Jeannie that Lauren ate compulsively. When she visited, they would have to lock the cabinets and refrigerator because she would roam the house at night, eating them out of house and home. Barbie recalled one occasion when the so-called ghost child got out of the trailer and into an empty home nearby. When they found her, she was sitting on the floor in the dark, eating dry ramen noodles. It was an odd story to tell at such a festive occasion, and a silence hung in the air afterward. Meanwhile, as everybody ate, Lauren was on the other side of the trailer's wall in the closet, starving. What Jeannie wanted to know, among many other things years later, was, why did Kenneth reveal the secret? Why to her, and why then? Jeannie Rivers and her husband Joe lived close to the Atkinsons' trailer about 12 miles south of Dallas. Endemic to the culture of the park, the residents waged a quiet battle against boredom in the evening hours in a variety of ways. Some worked on their cars, some just sat on lawn chairs drinking beer and gossiping, spreading rumors and outright lies. The Rivers family and the Atkinsons developed a front porch friendship, sharing barbecue dinners, taking turns minding each other's children, and bumming cigarettes. What drove Kenneth Atkinson to expose his family's secret to Jeannie Rivers? Was his conscience nagging at him That's what he told the police. Does a man who holds a gun at a toddler's head, threatening to kill her, have a conscience at all? One detective suggested that his motive may have involved jealousy, followed by a desire for revenge. You see, Barbie Atkinson was a terrible mother, and it became clear to Kenneth that she was also a lousy wife. She started having affairs with men she met on the internet. She would drive off to carry on with them, leaving him alone with the 6 children for days at a time. The night Lauren was rescued, Barbie was in West Texas. One theory that has been advanced about Kenneth's decision to expose the horrors of Lauren's life to an outside party was that he could get back at Barbie by blaming the abuse on her. He stated his case as a troubled, lonely husband to both Jeannie and Joe, and it made sense to them. Indeed, Barbie was rarely around at this point. When she did show up, the 30-year-old mother spent most of her time at the Texas Rose, a honky-tonk bar. She dressed in shirts that flaunted her cleavage and played video poker machines. The way Jeannie and Joe saw Kenneth at that point was that he was a dim-witted but dedicated caregiver for the children. As Jeannie recalled, "I honestly saw him 24 hours a day doing something with a child. Whether it was taking care of a boo-boo, changing a diaper, putting on shoes and socks, or walking them around the neighborhood, he was always taking care of those kids." The rivers would sour on Kenneth later, however. At his criminal trial, where strong circumstantial evidence proved that Lauren had been sexually abused by him for years, they were quick to castigate Kenneth. "He got what he deserved," Jeannie said. They both did. There were many missed opportunities to rescue Lauren. Over the years, many people could have, and perhaps should have, known about Lauren. Her grandparents were disturbed by how emaciated she was, but they accepted Barbie's explanation that, counterintuitive to what they may have assumed, it was due to an eating disorder that caused her to overeat. There was some truth to that last point, as Doris Calhoun would attest. When she came over to our house with that family, she was a pig. I mean, she would eat everything in sight. She would steal stuff from the refrigerator, like pork chops or a ham bone or anything left over, and take it to her bed and put it under her pillow. Years after she was rescued, it was difficult for Lauren to break the habit of hoarding food in her room. Though doctors later testified that Lauren stopped growing at about 2.5, Calhoun said she never noticed she was starving. Lauren developed lactose intolerance as a toddler, but Barbie continued to give her milk. Barbie was frustrated by the vomiting and diarrhea that resulted, which left Lauren undernourished, contributing even more to the pattern of dysfunction that grew worse by the day. The more Lauren cried and spat up, the angrier Barbie became. Psychologists would call what happened to Lauren scapegoating. One or both of the parents single out a child to blame for all the family's problems and encourage others to join in on the verbal and physical abuse. In 1995, Barbie began the practice of occasionally locking Lauren in a bathroom. Over the next 6 years, the confinement and starving would get exponentially worse. The last time I saw Lauren, Doris Calhoun said, she was fat. That was around Thanksgiving 1999, when Lauren was about 6.5. After that date, when Doris would visit her daughter, she was always told Lauren was at a friend's house. Did this series of coincidences sound suspicious to Doris? It was suspicious, and it should have been suspicious, but it wasn't, because in my mind, I already had the answer. She gave Lauren away at birth, and in my mind, she had to let Lauren go to these other people's houses until someone finally decided to take her. Doris was philosophical about it, saying parents try hard to believe their children, even when the stories don't quite make sense. In my creed, a mother would take a bullet for her kid. You never in a million years think, maybe she's got the child locked in a closet somewhere. Despite Doris's wishful thinking, there were signs of trouble. Child Protective Services investigated twice, and Lauren later recalled that a police officer came to the trailer on 2 separate occasions to check on her well-being. Both times, she said her parents sat her at the kitchen table with food in front of her, but told her not to eat. When the officer showed up, he stood on the porch, chatting with Barbie and Ken. He just stood there to check out the surroundings, Lauren said. I guess I was 6 or so. After he left, I'd go back in the closet like nothing happened. In June 1995, Barbie's high school friend and roommate, Stacy Wilson, complained to a social worker that then 2-year-old Lauren was being tied spread eagle to a bed. This occurred in Jasper, Texas. By the time the caseworker arrived, the family had moved. Nearly 18 months later, a complaint was filed in Wood County about children eating moldy food out of the garbage. The mother's name was listed as Barbara Calhoun. A CPS investigator was dispatched, but there was no response when they knocked on the door. Moments later, Ken and Barbie Atkinson walked up and offered their assistance. Who are you looking for? Barbara Calhoun, the caseworker said. We don't know her. We live down the road. The report was closed with the footnote, unable to make contact. The neighbors were listed as Mr. and Mrs. Atkinson. Kim Higgins, a CPS caseworker who guided Lauren and her siblings as they navigated the legal system years later, described the incident as a, quote, missed opportunity. But she is reluctant to characterize it as a mistake. There was never a time we went out and saw the kids and saw the home and talked to them and failed to do something. The failure was really on everyone else in these kids' lives. That fateful night in June 2001, Ken knew the police were coming. This reality sent him into a tailspin. He called his mother for advice. He sent 5 of the children, who ranged in ages from 1 to 10, to the Rivers house. He let Lauren out of the closet. Covering those tracks was a futile effort, but he tried nevertheless. He dressed her in jeans and a striped, long-sleeve polo shirt. At 6 p.m., Hutchins police officer Gary McLean and Joe Rivers pulled up at the trailer, located at 16 Moonbeam. Rivers entered first. The plan he and McLean concocted was that Joe would keep Kenneth calm, and by doing so, he would invite McLean in without a search warrant. Fortunately for Lauren, it worked. McLean walked into the trailer looking for the 8-year-old in question. I walk in, and I'm looking for an 8-year-old, except I saw what looked like a 3-year-old sitting there. So I immediately ask, "Where's Lauren?" Atkinson pointed at the bedraggled child sitting at the kitchen table. Her hair was matted and her eyes were sunken. She was eating a plate of SpaghettiOs. "I'm Officer McLean," he said to Lauren. "I'm here to take care of you." Perhaps for the first time in 6 years, Lauren smiled. The next to arrive at the scene were firefighters, emergency medical technicians, and Dallas County Sheriff's Detective Robert Allwart. After medical examination, Lauren's vital signs were found to be normal. The physical distress she was most distraught with at the time consisted of back pain and lice in her hair. Allwart asked Lauren her age. She held up 2 fingers and said, 2. Not the response Allwart expected. Later, when she was asked what led her to believe she was 2 years old, she said, "Because that's how many birthday parties I've had." Lauren then turned to Allwart, and after her voice dropped in volume and octave, she asked, "Can I go to the potty? They don't let me go." The Atkinsons had lived at that mobile park for a year. Nearly the entire time, Lauren was locked in a closet measured at 4 feet wide and 9 feet deep. It doubled as her sleeping quarters and latrine.
Could you open the door? Why not? Do you know why?
They put a chair behind it.
Oh, okay. Who did? Who put a chair behind it?
Barbie.
All right.
More details revealed during her medical examination. Her buttocks and legs were red and peeling from having sat in urine and feces for months on end. She was also covered in a downy layer of hair called lanugo. Lanugo is a symptom of starvation. After examining and questioning Lauren, Hutchins Fire Captain Ryan Woollever was appalled and stupefied. He walked up to Kenneth, who was sitting on the couch. "It doesn't make any difference what your answer is," Woollever said to Kenneth, "but tell me, what kind of justification did you and your wife have for doing this to her?" Kenneth's response, "My wife said she was bad." Woollever, who had a 4-year-old son at home, shook his head and walked away. Moments later, he wrapped Lauren in his regulation coat and carried her outside, where an ambulance was waiting to take her straight to Children's Medical Center, Dallas. Woollever was surprised by her reaction to all that was going on. She was really bright and just looking around. She didn't have that separation anxiety like kids who grow up with parents. I guess that was probably a sign she didn't have those people. Nurses awaited Lauren's arrival at the hospital. She was immediately taken to an exam room. Doctors ran tests on her lungs and took blood samples when Hutchins' Assistant Police Chief David Landers arrived on the scene. He could tell from the looks on the staff's faces that Lauren's condition was critical. One of the nurses pulled him aside. "She's got some internal problems. We think her body is trying to shut down and die." Dr. Susan Scott, a supervising pediatrician, entered the premises of the children's emergency room soon after Lauren was admitted in serious but stable condition. At the time she was admitted to the facility, Lauren weighed 25.6 pounds, the size of an average 2-year-old. Dr. Scott recalled her first encounter with Lauren as part of her testimony in the criminal trial of Barbie Atkinson. "When I first approached Lauren, she was lying on her bed, very quiet, withdrawn, very small, obviously malnourished. She had difficulty sitting up, could not stand either. She was very, very thin and emaciated. Her hair was broken and sparse. She had sunken eyes, hollowed cheeks, several teeth missing in the front." By the following morning, when Dr. Donna Persaud arrived in her room, Lauren had perked up. She had been given fluids and some nutrition via an intravenous. Persaud was then the director of a program at the hospital designed to evaluate children for abuse. She recalled the spark of life that had suddenly arose within Lauren. She already had this jovial spirit. I had a smile on my face, and she had a smile on her face, as if, oh my goodness, there's someone here who cares for me. Persaud's spirits were dampened while she examined Lauren. She discovered an injury she had theretofore never seen in her career outside of a textbook, a rectovaginal fistula. Translated into colloquial terms, it's a severe tearing of the vaginal opening from sexual abuse. To put it in perspective more precisely, Persaud recalled that her genital area was abnormal looking. She did not have a separate vagina and an anus. They came out together as one opening. The damage was so severe, so fundamentally destructive to this part of Lauren's anatomy, that it required a series of reconstructive surgeries and a temporary colostomy bag to correct it. A further complication emerged. Physicians were concerned about how to reintroduce food to Lauren. If the body is deprived of nutrition long enough, it lacks the enzymes and acids it requires for digestion. Introducing the wrong types of foods too quickly could have led to severe diarrhea, an electrolyte imbalance, and a heart attack. It's a condition that was first recognized in prisoners of war after World War II. The doctors were likely also unaware that Lauren was lactose intolerant, which would have added an additional layer of difficulty to the process of restoring her health through diet. Her condition was highly precarious, so the doctors had to be extremely cautious about how they handled her care. According to court records, a week after Lauren was admitted, she went into shock for several hours. Her blood pressure plummeted, her heart raced, and she went into respiratory arrest. Yet for some reason, perhaps due to a miracle, or maybe due to Lauren's iron will and indomitable resolve, it could have been one of any number of reasons, Lauren's heart refused to give up and kept beating. Clinical psychologist Leslie Lingnell worked at the hospital. She was charged with evaluating Lauren's state of mental health, as well as probing to learn everything about the circumstances of her life in the Atkinson household. Lingnell commented, "We had seen abuse cases, of course, but nothing to the extent we learned as her story unfolded." Lingnell's role at the facility would be redefined in the process. Initially, her mandate was only to advocate for the children, but attending to this case so deeply disturbed the staff that they too needed the balm of an empathetic word. As she put it, this was a situation that hurt a lot of people's hearts. The story attracted attention from across the country, as American hearts from coast to coast were broken by the tale of unimaginably horrific abuse Lauren suffered. Teddy bears and balloons were sent to the hospital in such volumes that Lauren's room could not contain them all. A conference room was used to store the surplus. Every day nurses would select 1 or 2 gifts and deliver them to Lauren's room. Lauren was the star patient in the hospital. Hospital workers from all levels would walk slowly by Lauren's room to get a peek at the girl in the closet, as she was now known. Others would go so far as to enter the room, sit next to her on the bed, and ask her questions. In the process of getting details, they got far more than they bargained for, and soon regretted their inquiries. More counseling of hospital staff was needed, as many who had quizzed Lauren about her experiences were openly weeping in the hallways. The hospital's administration was forced to create limits and guidelines on visits to Lauren's room. This was supported by Persaud. Lauren had a right to her privacy, and she had a right to the appropriate level of developmental stimulation. Once it was safe for Lauren to eat, she gained an average of 5 pounds a week. She also passed the time by singing country songs. Barbara and Ken would often play a country radio station in their bedroom at high volume to eliminate the risk that neighbors would hear Lauren's cries and screams. Years after her release, Lauren would avoid country music at all costs because of the flashbacks it triggered. Dr. Persaud was pleased by the progress Lauren was making. When we looked at this child, we didn't see someone who was ready to die, and we didn't see someone who was mad at the entire world. We saw someone who would take every opportunity given to her and thrive. That's what really touched our hearts. Sabrina heard a news story about a girl Lauren's age who had been locked in a closet whose floor was a bog of urine, feces, vomit, and carpet fibers. The child had been starved to the brink of death, raped, and physically and psychologically tortured in a home of 6 children and in as many years. Sabrina was horrified. Sabrina didn't yet know who the parents were, but she hadn't seen Lauren for 6 years. She hoped it wasn't Lauren. "I knew she was going to abuse her," she said, "but there wasn't anything we could do," she said, the hurt still fresh as it was the day she handed Lauren to Barbara in the Walmart parking lot in Jasper. I asked her, "Why do you want her back?" because I knew she hadn't bonded with Lauren. Barbara's response was both inadequate and infuriating to Sabrina. "My mom spent too much money getting her back. I can't give her up." Barbara had put a price tag on Lauren's life. How much money had her mother spent? The attorney's fees added up to $650. After surrendering Lauren to Barbara, Sabrina and her husband Bill tried everything in their power to locate Lauren. Their bond to her was impossible to break at this point. They called Doris Calhoun, begging her for some information about Lauren's whereabouts and the nature of the care she was receiving. They were also concerned that she may be subjected to the kind of abuse that had been documented in the photos they submitted to the court. Doris's response, "You lost her in court. Now just let it be." Sabrina and Bill would not give up on Lauren. They hired a private investigator. He came up empty. After all, it's hard to track a transient child who is not enrolled in school and is living in a pickup truck. Though they hadn't seen Lauren for some time, now that all hope of a reunion was lost, their house fell silent, as if they lived in a mausoleum. Sabrina couldn't bring herself to place Lauren's toys in a box to be put in storage, so she kept them on shelves next to her crib, which remained in Lauren's room. Once these adjustments were made, the room remained unaltered for years. as if it were a memorial rather than a bedroom. Given no choice but to move on with their lives, Sabrina and Bill moved to Ennis, Texas, from Canton in 1999. Bill had retired after 35 years from the glass company that had employed him in Waxahachie. The couple raised llamas, and Bill hunted and fished in his spare time. Sabrina had her own distractions. She decorated their new house with movie memorabilia and photos of Lauren. Every year at Christmas, Sabrina would buy Lauren the brilliant Barbie dolls. She stacked the unopened boxes in Lauren's bedroom closet. She never confided in anyone else that she still hoped Lauren would return to her home and open those boxes. While Sabrina did all she could to preserve the memory of Lauren in her mind, Barbara did all she could to erase Lauren from hers. During the 6 years after the Kavanaghs surrendered Lauren to Barbara Atkinson's custody, Barbie married twice, divorced twice, and eventually reconciled with Kenneth Atkinson, an unemployed carpenter. She'd given birth to 2 boys and a girl. All told, Barbara, unemployed, had 6 children with 4 different fathers. The Atkinson family moved frequently. This often occurred when rent was due or when it fell into arrears. From Jasper to a women's shelter in Louisiana, a trailer park near Longview, a few places in Waxahachie. Finally, she settled herself and her children in a trailer in Hutchins. Due to her neglect of housekeeping duties, it became a cesspool of clutter and filth. Meanwhile, Lauren's life became progressively worse. Detective Sergeant David Landers of the Cockrell Hill Police Department led the criminal investigation of Barbara and Kenneth Atkinson in 2001. He could remember every detail in the file, including the items he would prefer to forget. It started out with Barbie just putting Lauren next to her on the floor on a pallet. But Lauren would get up and go into the other room and get into stuff, so Barbie started putting her in the closet with a little gate across it. Then, when Lauren got old enough to push it down, Barbie just shut the door. When Lauren was rescued from that closet, she presented with over 24 cigarette burns and puncture wounds across her back and face. Her hair was infested with lice. Her skin was nearly translucent. Her esophagus was clogged with feces, carpet fibers, and plastic, which she often ate out of desperation when hunger pangs became unendurable. The public was shocked and outraged at what Barbie and Ken had wrought. They were so outraged that a crowd of protesters were assembled outside Dallas County Jail and awaited the Atkinsons' arrival. The crowd screamed insults at them. Footage of the perp walk was widely disseminated through the airwaves. One woman could be heard shouting, "How could you do that to your own child?" as Barbara wept, a trembling shell of the same woman who used to beat and rape her own child. Meanwhile, in Canton, Texas, Sabrina Kavanaugh was working the night shift at Dairy Queen when the newscasts aired. Bill called her to ask a question. What were Barbie and Kenny's full names? She told him their surname was Atkinson. "Sabrina, they're on TV." Sabrina was skeptical. Whether it was due to denial or delusion, she did not want to accept that Lauren had been the victim of the horrific crime for which Barbie and Ken were being charged. She called her sister and asked her to watch the newscast at 10 p.m. Sabrina was on her break smoking a cigarette when a few of her relatives pulled into the parking lot. Dread befell Kavanaugh. That's when I knew it was Lauren. The next thing I remember, I was on the ground, crying. It took 3 days for Sabrina and Bill Kavanaugh to persuade police and Child Protective Services that they had adopted Lauren the day after her birth, but lost custody due to a technicality. Emily Owens, a special investigator for the Dallas County District Attorney's Office, agreed to meet with them in a downtown hotel. At the meeting, Owens showed the Kavanaghs photos that had been taken of Lauren. Owens, realizing how disturbing it would be for them to see what damage had been done to Lauren in Barbara's care, or lack thereof, warned her, "Listen, before I show you the photos, I want you to know she's not going to look like the chubby toddler you remember." Bill looked through the photos and his eyes filled with tears. Despite what he saw, he said, "She's just as beautiful as the first day I saw her." Sabrina was enraged. She paced and cursed. As Owens recalled, she went back and forth from crying in disbelief to wanting to kill both of them and castrate Kenny. And she just kept saying, "I want my baby, I want my baby, I want my baby." The next morning, the Kavanaghs went to Children's Medical Center, Dallas. A nurse escorted them to a playroom where numerous children were running around while others played with puzzles on the floor. It was an emotionally charged experience for them to see Lauren again. As Sabrina said, she was in there with a bunch of kids, but we knew who she was right off. She was little bitty. Oh my God, you wouldn't believe her little arms and legs. They were no bigger than a pencil. She was real white, and she had an IV pole. It was difficult for the Kavanaghs to watch as Lauren struggled to her feet and shuffled off to the bathroom in a manner more typical of an elderly woman. They didn't interact with Lauren right away. For days they watched her from a distance, usually from the window of the playroom's door. Several days later, Dr. Susan Scott and Child Protection Services caseworker Kim Higgins decided that the time was right for Lauren to be reintroduced to the Kavanaghs. Lauren was eating at the time. A doctor or nurse would feed Lauren alone at a small red picnic table set up in a hallway. The reason being that Lauren was terrified someone would steal her food. Once she finished her lunch, Scott, Higgins, and the Kavanaghs approached Lauren as a group at the picnic table. "This is Sabrina and Bill Kavanaugh," Scott told Lauren. "Do you mind if we sit down?" Lauren looked up at Scott and asked, "Is this my new mom and dad?" This response took the Kavanaghs' breath away. Sabrina nearly got choked up, but she kept the reaction in check. The timing would not have been appropriate, considering how vulnerable Lauren was at the time. "You couldn't cry because it would scare her," Sabrina said. "They said that she remembered something about the 2 years we had her, and that's why she knew us. Nobody had told her about having new parents. None of the doctors or nurses had introduced that fact." Lauren was in hospital for a total of 5 weeks. Once Sabrina began visiting, she stayed every day and most nights. Lauren could only eat small meals, 6 or more a day. Her stomach still lacked the enzymes required to break down food. The nurses gave Lauren a watch, and after each meal they would show her where the hands of the clock needed to be before she could eat again. Though her meals were carefully scheduled and meted out, she hoarded food. She would take 2 bites out of a banana and hide the rest in her pillowcase, a habit she wouldn't break for many years. Lauren's reflexes to other stimuli were less predictable. She didn't always like to be touched and preferred to suffer alone after unpleasant medical procedures. If a nurse tried to soothe her, she would flinch, yet she never wanted to be alone. One afternoon, the Kavanaghs took her outdoors to the yard. Lauren was barefoot, and at one point she began screaming. She thought something was biting her feet. The reason? Her feet had never touched grass. Lauren continued to gain both weight and strength, but doctors were still unsure about what the future held when it came to the state of her overall health. For instance, her brain had atrophied from malnutrition, and she was intellectually delayed. Plus, there was no way for them to know for certain if she would ever catch up with her peers. They were even more concerned about her mental health. During 6 very crucial years in Lauren's development, she was not loved. She was not praised. Not only was she not doted on and nurtured, she was tortured and imprisoned. Scott had a sit-down with the Kavanaghs the day they were to take Lauren home for the first time in 6 years, a day they had long dreamed of. Scott was grave. She told them Lauren was not mentally disabled and shouldn't be treated as such. Scott didn't offer any further guidance in the matter. Scott continued, telling them, "We've had children who have been beaten. We've had children who have been starved. We've had children who have been sexually abused and neglected and psychologically abused, but we've never had a child who's had it all." There was no cause for either optimism or pessimism since doctors didn't know what to expect. When Lauren began her new life with the Kavanaghs, all 3 members of this new family would have to adjust, with many sacrifices and accommodations required to make it work. Raising children is challenging under any circumstance, but given the damage Lauren sustained while living with the Atkinsons, there were problems lying in wait that would test her adoptive parents constantly. After Lauren returned to the Kavanaghs, there were happy moments. She could be effervescent and giggly. She crawled from lap to lap, luxuriating in the attention and affection. In those moments, she was no different from any other child who was well fed and loved. Internally, she was someone else entirely. Caring for an abused child was quite different from what they encountered 6 years before as parents. She exhibited behaviors that were disturbing and perplexing. They would find her sleeping in the closet. To prevent further incidents of this, they removed all closet doors. Sometimes Lauren would get up in the middle of the night and eat until she vomited. Sabrina and Bill would leave cookies and pink lemonade on the kitchen table. The doctors suggested locking the cabinets and refrigerator, but they resisted this idea. She'd had enough of that, Sabrina insisted. She didn't need to have food locked away. She needed to learn that it would always be there for her. The Kavanaghs soon realized that they had to keep her from eating out of the garbage can to ensure she didn't eat things like toothpaste or chalk or crayons or peeling paint. The compulsion to eat materials that are not commonly designated as foodstuffs is called pica and is common among undernourished children. It shouldn't have come as a surprise, considering that Lauren would sometimes resort to eating plastic from margarine bowls or chewing shards of wood from the closet door during her years in the Atkinson house. Occasionally a sibling would show mercy and give her a few hands of dog food. During those 6 years, Lauren could not afford to be a picky eater. Lauren had a lot to learn about entry-level, day-to-day living. She wasn't potty trained. She didn't know how to use silverware. She wouldn't wear shoes at first because she had never worn them and they hurt her feet. She never asked for a toy or candy at the store. Never, Sabrina recalled. She'd play with something if you handed it to her, but otherwise she'd mostly just sit there. Bathing offered up drama on its own terms. Lauren would scream hysterically. Barbara would push Lauren's head under the faucet and laugh while Lauren gulped desperately for air. Sabrina recalled bath time with Lauren nearly traumatized her in her own right. Trying to wash her hair, oh my God, I'll never forget that. She'd scream, "Please don't drown me, please don't drown me." How do you explain to an 8-year-old you're not going to drown her? Sabrina's solution to bathing Lauren without alarming her was to use a tiny cup to wet Lauren's hair, approaching it in stages. It was time-consuming, but Sabrina was willing to avoid triggering Lauren by any means necessary. Some of Lauren's reactions were easily predicted. Her food-related issues, her fear of sleeping in an open bedroom, her reaction to disciplinary measures. Other incidents were harder to cope with. Sometimes Lauren would cry and say things like, "Now you're not going to feed me anymore." They didn't always know what would trigger strong reactions from Lauren. For instance, one day at a McDonald's playground, Lauren became emotional after looking across the parking lot. Daddy, they're putting a baby in the trunk." This would make sense to them later. On the rare occasion when Ken and Barbie took Lauren out of the house, they locked her in the trunk of the car. Unless they were moving, she was typically taken to the home of a man who had paid them to allow him to sexually abuse Lauren. Hours later they would return, lock her in the trunk once again, drive her home, and deposit her in the closet. Other times the family went through the drive-thru of McDonald's or Pancho's Mexican buffet and eat as Lauren starved in the trunk. Lauren had not actually seen the family in the McDonald's parking lot load an infant into the trunk. Bill took her up into his arms and walked her close to where the car was parked, proving the family was just loading suitcases and blankets into the trunk. Another thing that confused Sabrina for years was Lauren's fear of Halloween and clowns. That first year we were getting ready to take her to downtown Canton to the Halloween carnival when she started screaming, "Are you taking me to the Candyman's house? Are you taking me back to them?" We tried to explain what Halloween was, but she just wouldn't calm down. There was a perfectly valid reason for Lauren's fear of Halloween and clowns. Lauren told them about how Barbie and Ken regularly sold her to pedophiles. One regular customer was a man who wore a clown mask from the horror movie Candyland while he raped her. One of the worst assaults happened on Halloween. Lauren described these events to therapist Lindsay Jones. She has recounted these stories over and over very consistently. When asked about the reliability of Lauren's memory, she hasn't embellished anything over the years to make it a better story. She's never said anything that makes me think they're not accurate. Dr. Barbara Rila, a Dallas psychologist, interviewed Lauren at the Children's Hospital. During one session, she probed for details of the abuse. She quit talking. She stared off into space. Rila testified during Barbie Atkinson's trial. She seemed to be in a completely different zone, and I knew that my questions at that point were activating memories she did not want to discuss. Lauren sustained an enormous amount of damage, but Rila speculated that the worst among them was growing up without love, as she posits. Neglect is probably the most pervasive and devastating form of abuse that any child can endure. It will last longest and affect more areas of functioning in a child's life than had she simply been abused or molested. From the age of 2 through to 8, Lauren never played games or with toys. She never flipped through a picture book. She was never taught how to tie her shoes. She didn't know the difference between left and right. Most importantly, psychologists assert, she missed out on key lessons children are supposed to learn at that age that help them to function in society. Lessons about following rules, about integrity and honesty, about empathy, sympathy, right and wrong. The Atkinson household was an ethical and moral wasteland. How could Lauren have learned what was right from selfish, narcissistic sociopaths like Ken and Barbie Atkinson? Learning to trust would be extremely difficult for Lauren. The assumption that what resides within every human being is little more than pure evil would become a nearly insurmountable obstacle to intimacy, as her girlfriends would learn in the years to come.
When you say you don't trust people, what is it you say to yourself that makes you think something bad's going to happen? What is it you are suspicious of them about?
I don't know you.
Because they might hurt you?
Yes.
In what way?
Anyway.
And so you keep them at arm's length, or worse?
Well, probably worse.
Understand how much you trust someone else is a function, really, of how much you trust yourself to be able to handle whatever they do. That's how much you will trust somebody. When you believe in yourself enough to know that Janae can be flawed, that she can do something that disappoints you, that hurts you, and you'll be okay, you can handle that. That's when you can start trusting people a little step at a time. And right now, you haven't decided whether you're durable enough to handle a violation of trust. And so you're behind this wall. And here's the thing, if you come out from behind that wall, I'll make you a promise. You might get hurt. If you stay behind that wall, I'll make you a promise. You will be hurt. Why is what I'm saying emotional for you?
Because it makes sense of why I'm always pushing people away, and I hardly have any friends, or because I'm very guarded and I'm always pushing people away. And I get really lonely a lot of times because I feel like I have no one.
You're behind the wall and you are getting hurt, correct?
Yes, sir.
And is Janae perfect?
No.
No?
Whew. Y'all don't even know the half of that.
But if you stayed behind the wall all the time, you wouldn't know her.
Yes.
Right? Exactly my point. You venture out. You might get hurt here and there, but you're guaranteed to be hurt back here.
It's a difficult load to carry, as Rila testified. There will be a lifelong set of conditions Lauren will deal with and be challenged by for the long haul. As long as she's living, she'll carry the shadows and some specific limitations in how well she can think and learn and reason. More details about the abuse Lauren suffered were not completely disclosed and understood until she moved in with the Kavanaghs in July 2001. The doctors described repetitive penetrative trauma as the cause of the damage to her genitalia. The problem was, nobody knew exactly how it happened or who was responsible. Sandra Mahoney worked as counselor in the Irving Independent School District and was in the process of moving her practice and home to Canton when she first saw news reports about the girl in the closet. Sandra is a Christian who specializes in play therapy for sexually abused children. Mahoney decided that divine intervention was at work when she discovered Lauren's plight. She called Child Protective Services and notified them that she would volunteer her time to work with Lauren. When I first went over to the house, she looked like a little 3-year-old. She really had a very large vocabulary, which I was surprised about. Lauren learned to speak by listening to the country music radio station that served as her only connection to the outside world for 6 years. Between the banter of the on-air personalities and the song lyrics, Lauren developed an understanding of language on her own terms. Lauren's favorite song was Don't Laugh at Me by Mark Willis, perhaps not surprisingly since the song is about loneliness. At the hospital, whether she was lying in her bed or struggling to walk around the playroom with her IV pole in tow, she drew tears from the adult staff when she would start singing the lyrics, which go as follows. Don't laugh at me. Don't call me names. Don't get your pleasure from my pain. In God's eyes, we're all the same. Someday we'll all have perfect wings. Don't laugh at me. The lyrics couldn't have been more appropriate. Still, though Lauren spoke in complete sentences and even cracked jokes, she didn't always understand the context of the words. She didn't recognize the sun and had never seen a television. Everything that was mundane to the Kavanaghs was exotic to Lauren. While driving down the road, Lauren would point at things and ask, "What's that?" endlessly. It could have been anything, a light pole, clouds, a fence post. Once she was told horses are big and brown. She pointed at hay bales in an open field and said, "Look, horses." As part of the methodology of play therapy, Mahoney spent hours on the floor with Lauren, playing with dolls, drinking make-believe tea, and pretending to prepare meals. Mahoney recalls some of the interactions these activities would engender. She would sometimes make food for me and give it to me, and then she'd say, "You can't eat that," with lots of anger. And so you knew these were things she had experienced. One of Lauren's favorite games was to go outside and paint herself with red paint, signifying blood. Then she would run to the garden hose screaming and quickly try to clean it off. Other times she simply lay on the floor groaning. "Go get the good mom, go get the good mom," Mahoney recalled her saying. "Take me to the hospital." Next, she would lie down next to a piece of paper, take a red marker, and scribble a huge stain. "It was blood. It was blood," Lauren told Mahoney, moaning. "They hurt me. They hurt me." The play, in terms of activities and toys, is selected and directed by the child. This gives them power, and with that feeling of empowerment comes a feeling of security that they keep all threats at bay. It's quite the opposite of the feelings that arise when they are victims of abuse. The powerlessness of abuse leaves children feeling helpless. Once they feel secure in the knowledge that they don't have to protect themselves from a malevolent force, they don't fear consequences of trusting and opening up. Inevitably, Mahoney said, the painful thoughts rise to the surface as the child's imagination is directed not by a pushy adult, but according to their own pace and comfort level. Lauren was no exception. A male puppet was provided, and she called it the Bad Dad. Lauren threw it against the wall, stomped on it, and screamed at it. It took much longer for the anger she felt toward Barbara to surface. When it did, Lauren ordered Mahoney to sit in the corner of the room. Lauren needed the physical autonomy that had been denied to her for so long. Lauren's eyes darkened. A guttural growl emanated from her throat. She paced in circles like a tiger evaluating its prey. She pointed at Mahoney. "You're the mean mom. Get in the corner. Go to jail." She became so invested in this, she lost herself in her own imagination. She assaulted Mahoney, hitting and kicking her. After one point, Lauren ran into the hallway and told Sabrina, "Mom, I put the mean mom in jail, and she's never, ever, ever, ever getting out." Mahoney said Lauren repeated the word ever almost 50 times. That session went on for over an hour, Mahoney said. "I just sat there and let her push on me and hit on me." The anger coming out of that little girl was unbelievable. Lauren's anger was formidable, but finite, at least for the time being. Exhausted, she sprawled on the middle of the floor and rested. Over the following 18 months after Barbara Atkinson was booked at the Hutchins City Jail, detectives plumbed the depths of depravity to which Barbara and Kenneth had sunken and brought Lauren down into. The prolonged starvation, the savage sexual torture, the relentless neglect. The evidence mounted against Barbara and Kenneth formed the basis of their high-profile, widely publicized criminal trials in 2002. Hutchins Assistant Police Chief David Landers, who led the investigation, knew about the starvation, but he couldn't fathom the depths to which she had suffered. The day she was rescued, he was fascinated to see that she seemed largely unfazed by the commotion going on around her in the emergency room. She was hospital sick, and more than sick. You could tell she was in pain, and she was just so little bitty. At one point, Lauren mentioned she was thirsty. Without delay, Landers stepped around the corner and bought her a soft drink. Lauren perked up when he poured some over ice and handed her the cup. I didn't want to give her anything strong, so all I could think of was a Mountain Dew. I just couldn't let her sit there thirsty. Lauren's memory of him from that day is that he is, quote, the Mountain Dew man. It was about the third kind thing anybody had done for her in 6 years. Hours after being taken into custody, the Atkinsons were speaking freely, if not honestly, with the police during questioning. Barbara spoke tenderly of Lauren as if she were the misunderstood mother figure they mistook for the real offender. Her initial statements regarding Lauren belied her day-to-day treatment of the girl. Lauren should be able to be out playing and laughing with the whole family. "I know the one I owe the most love and security to is Lauren. She deserves so much more, and I love her with all my heart and soul." Days later, the shell of artifice fell away, and the monster within was revealed to Child Protective Services investigator Stephanie Boniol. "I never loved Lauren. I never wanted her. When my other kids hurt, I hurt. When Lauren hurt, I felt nothing." This made perfect sense, considering that she would howl with laughter while Kenneth raped Lauren. She delighted in Lauren's suffering and was overjoyed at Lauren's sorrow. Kenneth Atkinson primarily blamed Barbara for the abuse, which he said intensified in 1996 when the family moved into an old home in Waxahachie and his wife fell into a depression after having a miscarriage. Kenneth contributed to the abuse in many ways, however, and that included using his carpentry skills to build a wall of cabinets to partition off a windowless room where Lauren, then 3 years old, was kept. A hole was cut in the floor, and a potty chair was placed over it. Barbara said Kenneth would get frustrated when Lauren cried or got into things. He would bind her by duct taping her legs at the calf, tie her hands behind her back, and throw her into a crawl space under the kitchen pantry. It was known in the family as the hole. By the time the Atkinsons and their 6 children moved to Hutchins years later, Lauren was confined to a closet in the master bedroom almost the entire time she lived in the house. The Atkinsons continued to starve Lauren. The only food she ate was smuggled in by her older sister, Blake. Sometimes there were few other options but dog food. If the larder were more plentiful, she brought her cans of cold soup, crackers, bags of bread, and an occasional tub of margarine. Occasionally Barbara or Kenneth would see the leftover containers, cans, or bags in the closet, and they would beat Blake. They didn't know it was her initially, but Blake would take the beating to protect her younger siblings. Barbara's rage and resentment toward Lauren grew in ferocity over time. As Emily Owens, an investigator for the Dallas County District Attorney's Office, recalled, Barbie started off where she'd just be mad at her for mistakes and accidents, and she would spank her, and the spankings got a little harder, and the feelings got a little harder. And as things happen, they don't seem so bad after you do it over and over. Then it gets easier to do, and you do it a little bit more, and you do it a little bit more, and then we got to where we are now. It was Dallas Police Detective Dan Lesher who kicked in the door of the Atkinsons' trailer the night the search warrant was served. For several hours, officers from at least 3 police agencies examined the scene and captured what they found on video and in still photos to create a snapshot of the hellhole all the Atkinson children were being raised in. The officer noted that it smelled like a filthy litter box and looked like a, quote, homeless camp. There were piles of dishes encrusted with rotten food. Piles of moldy clothes littered the floor. Being so lazy, sometimes Barbara and Ken would throw the clothes in the garbage and buy more at discount stores. The trailer was cluttered with toys and stuffed animals, which were strewn across the floor in every room. While Lauren starved in the closet, there was food in the kitchen, such as graham crackers, macaroni and cheese, bread and coffee. There was lots of cold beer in the refrigerator. In the freezer there was chicken and ham next to 2 packages of microwavable enchiladas. Emily Owens was astonished. There was a lot of food in the refrigerator and fast food boxes everywhere. So people were eating, and Barbara sure wasn't missing any meals. But what got me was there was food down for the dogs and dog vitamins. They were treating the dogs better than Lauren. The officers searched for tangible evidence of sexual abuse that could be used congruently with results of the medical examinations of Lauren that were sure to follow. They found a box of sex toys, but nothing incriminating, though they did discover a wooden paddle and a book entitled 101 Activities for Kids in Tight Spaces. Those 2 items were seized. The officers made their way to the master bedroom and the inevitable confrontation with the repugnant reality of the closet. Dan Lesher was disgusted. I remember 2 things about that closet: the smell and the first step. It was carpeted and urine just squished up around my shoes. There wasn't a dry place I could find that wasn't soaked with body fluids, and there was feces smeared everywhere. Lesher was called in to supervise the collection of evidence at this scene because his reputation preceded him in this regard. He'd worked for some of the city's most revolting crimes and had the strong stomach to show for it. Still, he had seen nothing like this. I'd been in trailers worse than that in my career, but I'd never been in a cage like that before. And that's what it was. It was a cage, not a closet. Lesher made 2 critical decisions. He instructed deputies to remove the closet door and submit it as evidence. There were scratch marks on the door handle, likely from Lauren biting and clawing to escape. He also asked them to roll up the fetid carpet and place it in a bag to be referenced as evidence during the trial. Nobody was thrilled about that, but everybody understood it was a necessary evil. The jury needed a vision of what this girl was subjected to. Patricia Hogue was head of the District Attorney's Child Abuse Division and was described by detectives as, quote, meaner than 3 snakes dipped in kerosene. That they meant as a compliment. She is now an attorney for a non-profit organization that focuses on child abuse issues. She had her work cut out for her. It was a big case, and there was a lot of media attention. Obviously, I was aware of that, and that's why I was handling the case. I didn't want this one coming back on appeal because Lauren just couldn't handle that. Though there was no doubt in anybody's mind that Barbara and Kenneth Atkinson were guilty, given the damage done to Lauren's body and their incriminating confessions, they were never tried for sexual assault. They both denied raping Lauren. Kenneth Atkinson was charged with the aggravated sexual assault of a child, but those particular charges were dropped when the prosecutors learned that Lauren would not be able to testify. The closest she ever came to making an incriminating statement against Kenneth was during play therapy when she said the, quote, bad dad hurt me, and demonstrated how by poking a hand and thumb into the vagina of an anatomically correct doll. She followed this up by hitting the doll over and over between the legs, moaning in pain, screaming, and growling. Though this was entered into court documents, it could not be considered official testimony. When asked to verbally articulate what had been done to her, Lauren would shut down. She would go inward, narrowing her eyes. She would become distant, staring into space. Psychologists speculated that it could take years of therapy before she would ever feel safe enough to talk about the abuse. As Patricia Hogue said, Lauren was so developmentally traumatized, she really wasn't in any condition to talk about the sexual abuse. We went with a stronger case, and the one that wouldn't require her to testify. During Barbara Atkinson's criminal trial, the evidence was unfurled before her, the judge, the jury, and the public gallery. It was all damning, and for the faint of heart, highly disturbing. Doctors testified about the physical damage that was done to Lauren's body due to the sexual abuse, malnutrition, and myriad complications due to being confined in a closet and never being exposed to sunlight. Psychologists detailed the short-term effects of the trauma Lauren sustained and speculated on the long-term effects that were sure to complicate her life in the years to come. After all, revealing the damage done to Lauren's body and psyche, the police detailed the nauseating details of the conditions Lauren languished in. After the testimony by the scientists appealed to their logical faculties, the evidence presented by the police latched onto the senses. A prosecuting attorney unrolled the carpet from the closet in front of the jury. Almost as soon as they leaned forward to get a closer look, they recoiled backwards from the stomach-churning stench. Though Barbara never showed mercy to Lauren in any form, for any reason, she spared two of her children from testifying as witnesses by pleading guilty to a felony injury to a child. Nevertheless, the jury still had to deliberate her sentence as a matter of protocol. Brad Lawler, Barbara's attorney, attempted to drum up sympathy for her in his closing argument by portraying her as both a victim and perpetrator. He felt it was important to point out that she was born to a woman who was a 13-year-old drug addict and schizophrenic. They lived from one flophouse to another until she was adopted by Doris and David Calhoun when she was 4 years old. Lawler also suggested that she, too, was physically and sexually abused as a toddler. You can only suspect what type of abuse was visited on Barbara at the hands of a known child molester and child abuser, Lawler said. For the first 3 years of her life, she'd been shoved around from place to place, neglected to the max, abused. A psychologist testified that Barbara suffered from borderline personality disorder and that this distorted Barbara's perception of reality, in which Lauren became a scapegoat for the family's problems. In Hogue's final statement, she invited the jury into a figurative tour of Lauren's closet. I want you to put yourself in the dark. The light switch is too high for you to reach. And just think about her, day after day after day in the dark, as she listened while her brothers and sisters played out in the trailer house and rode their bikes and played outside in the sunshine and walked on the grass. Think about how Lauren felt. The jury deliberated for 5 hours before they reached their verdict, life in prison. The jurors explained that the reason the deliberation took so long was that some of the panelists were concerned that Barbara would be eligible for parole too soon. Nearly a year later, another jury convicted Kenneth Atkinson of the same crime. His sentence, life. Both Barbie and Ken will be eligible for parole in 2031. That year, Lauren will turn 38. Emily Owens asked Barbara Atkinson if she would agree to be interviewed after her sentencing. Barbara consented, and they met in a small room at Lou Sterrett Justice Center. Throughout the 2-hour interview, a profile of Barbara's full personality emerged, and it was puzzling. She was a human monster who had committed unthinkable crimes against her own child, but she was surprised by the woman who sat before her that day. This Barbara Atkinson was wounded and vulnerable and fearful of what the future might bring. Atkinson said she never perceived Lauren's physical persona as emaciated and sickly until she saw photos that were taken of her shortly after the arrest, photos that were displayed as evidence during the trial. Atkinson was terrified and desperate for clemency. "Do you think God will ever forgive me?" she implored of Owens. "I beg him, but I don't know if he's going to listen." Owens' mind raced. She was at a loss to figure out an appropriate reaction for this. Was she capable of feeling empathy for such a woman? Taking that girl's hands and praying with her is the hardest thing I've ever done, Owens said. I just wanted to pray, God, kill her. But I don't think it was her chains that were released that day. They were mine, and I saw her in a different light. Psychologists say that victims of severe childhood abuse can react with skepticism when faced with the notion that good things can last, joyful moments are genuine, and expressions of love are born of sincerity. Lauren Kavanaugh would know.
I don't think I actually love anything. I care about stuff, but I don't love stuff. I'd take a bullet for my mom if somebody came up to her and shot her. She may call that love, but I call that caring because I don't think I'm not going to say not able to love. I'm going to say I don't think I'm comfortable with it.
I'm pretty good at putting on a smile, Lauren says, but it doesn't mean I'm happy. In her bedroom in the Kavanaugh homestead, there were two signs of the struggle that she wrestled with every day of her life. There was a black sheet hanging in front of her closet instead of a door. Another thing was a book on her nightstand called The PTSD Breakthrough, PTSD standing for Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder. Hardly standard reading for teenagers, who would normally be more inclined to read pop culture magazines than a psychoanalytic text. Anxiety is a chronic problem. If there isn't any food nearby, if she's alone, or if country music is broadcast on the radio, she becomes uneasy. One could only expect such symptoms, considering all she went through in the Atkinson House of Horrors. For 6 years, she was alone in a dark closet, alone with the hurt, alone with the hunger. The life she deserved passed her by on the other side of the wall. A life she could hear but was not permitted to experience. No cartoons on the television. No card games at the kitchen table. No horsing around with her siblings. No laughter, no joy, only fear. Fear of the nauseatingly sweet smell of her mother's perfume. Fear of the halitosis stench of Kenneth's beer-infused breath. These both acted as olfactory harbingers of impending sexual abuse. When she wasn't being molested or raped, she awaited it with terror and dread. She lived this life for 6 years. She was naked with the only blanket she was allowed. It was sheer and soaked with urine. She was bathed only in darkness, and she focused intently on a sliver of light under the door, hoping it would open, but also in fear of what would happen if it did. But they abused me when they let me out, Lauren said, so I can't really say what's worse. They were both torture. Sometimes, when Barbie and Ken really wanted to torture Lauren in isolation, they would place her underneath the trailer, with just her blanket. In cold weather, Lauren would shiver, coming close to hypothermia. When she was at the brink of death, they would bring her back in and put her back in the closet. Lauren's release from the hospital was a celebrated occasion. Because her story had received news coverage nationwide, reporters and television satellite trucks were parked outside, awaiting her departure, hoping to get a glimpse, and better yet, a few words from the girl in the closet. On the 5th floor, Lauren, 8 years old, played with her new parents, Bill and Sabrina Kavanaugh. She was clad in a pink dress and wore sunglasses. Kim Higgins, the Child Protective Services worker, stepped off the elevator. Lauren was happy to see her. She was also elated about starting her new life at the Kavanaugh's house. "I'm going home today," she enthused. "Come on, let's go, let's go." It was Higgins who drove Lauren to her new home. Lauren had to be strapped into a car seat that normally contained an infant. Though Lauren gained 10 pounds during her stay at the hospital, by state law she was still too small to ride like a typical 8-year-old girl held in place with a regulation seatbelt. Lauren wore size 2T clothing and weighed approximately 35 pounds. When Lauren walked into her new home, she walked into what looked less like a homecoming and more like a birthday party. The house was decorated with balloons and streamers and a pile of presents waiting to be unwrapped. Lauren was shown her bedroom. There were drawers filled with brand new clothes. They assured her that between meals she could always find graham crackers and pink lemonade sitting on the kitchen table. Lauren was delighted as well by the herd of llamas Bill was raising in an open field behind their house. The Kavanaugh house and its surrounding property was an ideal place for Lauren to heal after everything she had been through. It was quiet, and she had plenty of space and time to adjust in a place where she felt safe. She could enjoy nature, which was still new to her, and was unknown while she resided in the Atkinsons' closet. Had the Kavanaghs been unable or unwilling to take Lauren in, she would have had many other foster parents to choose from. People from all over the country, many with advanced university degrees and lengthy titles following their names, submitted thick applications detailing their worthiness as adoptive parents. Higgins was aware of their credentials, but as far as she was concerned, there were no candidates more qualified to care for Lauren than Bill and Sabrina Kavanaugh. They didn't exactly fit the same profile as many of the other applicants, with all the PhDs and Esquires. Sabrina has described herself, perhaps facetiously, as an East Texas redneck. Bill was likely a product of similar stock, with his ever-present cowboy hat and cowboy boots. It was their dedication to Lauren and willingness to care for her, even after losing custody to Barbie Atkinson, that convinced Higgins Lauren belonged with them. Bill and Sabrina wanted Lauren because she was their baby, Higgins said, not because of what she'd been through, not because of the news story. And having someone love you for who you are just can't be replaced. For the time being, Lauren's arrival at the Kavanaugh home was a joyous occasion. However, the abuse she suffered was sure to create complications in the years to come, not just psychologically, but also medically and cognitively. This abuse case was unprecedented and disturbed even the most seasoned professionals in the legal, medical, and law enforcement professions. The joy the Kavanaughs felt was untouched by caution at the time. Optimism, that was another matter. Bill Kavanaugh had a bear-like profile. He was a big man, standing at 6'2", and spoke with a loud, booming roar of a voice, like a bear. He was calloused and sun-baked from years of hard physical labor under the hot southern sun. Though some were concerned that this bear-like man might intimidate Lauren, Lauren found him to be less like an aggressive grizzly bear posing a threat, and more like a huge teddy bear, a gentle giant. Her experiences with other men were largely a source of torture, but she felt loved and secure with Bill. She would sit in his lap and cuddle into his belly like it was a soft pillow. She loved his sense of humor. Bill would sit at Lauren's miniature table and chairs on the patio and have pretend tea parties with her, where she served imaginary tea and cookies, and he would act as though he consumed them for real and enjoyed them. "Oh, this tea is delicious," he'd say in a squeaky voice, feeling it was appropriate for the occasion, holding a tiny cup with his pinky finger extended. Lauren would recall this years later and laugh. "He spoiled me. It felt good to be spoiled." Having spoiled her so much, it fell to Sabrina to be the disciplinarian and therefore the less popular, though no less loving parent. It was her contention that just like Lauren needed to be loved and nurtured, she also needed a certain amount of discipline, structure, and clear expectations. She felt that in time those elements of her home life would build self-confidence and provide guideposts for her daughter to rely on while navigating her way through school and peer groups. Lauren wasn't exactly thrilled with this at the time, as Sabrina attests. "She used to tell me I was as mean as her other mother. Yeah, that hurt." The Kavanaughs sharply disagreed about parenting styles. One particular issue had them at loggerheads: spanking. Bill sided with CPS workers and the doctors at the Children's Hospital, who said that because Lauren had already suffered from being a victim of so much violence in her life, spanking was verboten. Therapist Sandra Mahoney recalls Sabrina's opposition to this argument. But Sabrina was like, "This is my child and I'm doing it my way. I'll spank her when I want to, and y'all can come take her away if you want to." So it was that kind of bravado. Sabrina felt very strongly that no other form of discipline would work with Lauren. I did whip Lauren, and CPS didn't like that. But when you have a child who has had no toys, taking toys away as a punishment means nothing, and we tried timeout. But that didn't faze her either. She'd been in a closet for 6 years. Bill Kavanaugh died of a stroke in December 2003. He was 65 years old. Lauren remembers Sabrina and Bill fighting, and she was scared of Bill toward the end of his life. Despite this, she prefers to focus on the happier memories of the experiences she shared with him: fishing trips, feeding the llamas, breakfast at Dairy Queen on Saturday mornings. Whatever flaws Bill had, Lauren was profoundly bereaved after he passed away. "I cried a lot when he died," she said. "He was a good guy." Lauren's elementary school education was far from orthodox. At 8 years of age, she was several years older than her classmates in kindergarten. Most days, Sabrina went to school with her. She even volunteered in the classrooms of Eustis Elementary School so she could sneak across the hall at different points throughout the day to check on Lauren. At one point, her dedication to her work at the school was rewarded with a position as a teacher's aide. One day, out of the blue, Lauren walked up in front of her class and began to regale the class and her teacher with a story of her abuse. She recalls the teacher's shock and indecision about how to handle it with a laugh. The teacher was like, "Oh my God, what do I do? Do I make her stop? Do I let her go on?" Lauren finished the story and promptly returned to her seat. Sabrina was happy to hear about this. It was good that she got up and talked about it, and I'm glad the teacher didn't stop her because it would have made Lauren feel ashamed. Most of the children's parents and, eventually, most of Lauren's classmates knew her story. For the most part, they were kind about it. Unfortunately, the social Darwinism of the schoolyard was to rear its ugly head, and Lauren was not spared from bullying. She was teased about being the oldest child in the class, and as her self-esteem diminished, she also struggled with her schoolwork. As her peers read and solved math equations with ease, Lauren struggled. This contributed even further to her injured self-concept. Learning disabilities are common among children who have suffered child abuse, and Lauren's was a landmark case. Lauren was devastated by her inability to catch up academically. She would say, through tears, "I'm stupid." Sabrina was prepared for this and had the right answer for Lauren. If you took those kids in your class and put them in the closet and did to them what happened to you, 99% of them wouldn't even be alive today. You're strong. You're a survivor. However, while Sabrina was fiercely protective of Lauren, she could also be harshly critical. She found it difficult to accept or understand that the kind of torture Lauren endured could produce intellectual disabilities. Though Mahoney admired Sabrina for the ways in which she cared for Lauren, she was also frustrated by the lack of understanding she encountered in this area. "I love Sabrina because I see the warm side of her and the hurt and the tears that will come sometimes, but it's also been like, I just want to shake you." We can look back over the years and see that other sets of parents might have handled many issues better, but I don't know that there could be any more love for Lauren than Sabrina has for her. Sabrina was aware of how outsiders viewed her parenting style. She said it's easy to critique someone else's parenting from afar when you had the benefit of a cool head and time to consider options. Lauren's feelings toward Sabrina ran hot and cold throughout the years. Sometimes they would sleep in the same bed, and then there were times when they would be so angry at each other they wouldn't speak for days. 12 years into their relationship, with all its ups and downs, Lauren never spoke in depth to Sabrina about the abuse. Lauren is not comfortable being this vulnerable with her. She's judging, she doesn't listen, and she just asks a bunch of questions like, "Why didn't you do this?" or "Why didn't you do that?" Though Lauren has remarked that she would take a bullet for Sabrina, she is unsure if she loves her. She isn't sure if she loves anybody. "I'm not saying I'm not capable of love," she said. "I just haven't felt it yet." Psychologists say that parenting a child who has suffered from extreme abuse requires more than the usual amount of sacrifice that comes with raising children. As Mahoney says, "You can't fill Lauren up. She wants more. She needs more. She never feels loved enough." Sabrina concedes that raising Lauren was hard, but she said she would do it all over again. She has two regrets when it comes to raising Lauren. One is the time when she whipped Lauren with a belt. The other time was when she let Lauren spend the night with relatives. For 5 years, Sabrina rarely let Lauren out of her sight. There were no sleepovers, slumber parties, or even spending an afternoon at a friend's house. Mahoney, CPS caseworker Higgins, and others urged her to be more lenient. Leniency was granted in August 2005 when she allowed Lauren to attend a sleepover at the home of her niece, her husband, and their 2 young sons. Sabrina was right to trust her instincts before. The morning after the sleepover, her niece's husband, Jesse Bass, invited Lauren out to the family's barn, where he sexually assaulted her. He was sentenced to 13 years in prison for aggravated sexual assault of a child and possession of child pornography. Said Sabrina of the incident, "I blamed my niece a little bit, but I blamed myself, mostly. So those people who think I'm strict, well, they're entitled to their opinion. You leave me to mine. Don't even think about trying to tell me how to raise my child. That's my baby right there, and ain't nobody going to jack with my baby. That's not happening again." Lauren had a way of coping with the sexual assaults as they occurred.
You start out crying, then you beg them, and then you just shut up because nothing's working and everything you do seems to make everything worse. So you just lay there and let them do whatever they are doing to you happen to you and try not to make a sound. Just makes it worse.
He knew what her parents had did to her. He knew everything that she had gone through, and he just didn't care. Didn't bother him at all.
I'm thinking in my head, I know what he's gonna do. I don't want him to hurt me even more than what he was already planning to do. And I also didn't want him to, threaten, my mom or me. So just, you do what you have to. Well, I did what I had to.
Sabrina was listening in on this commentary. "But you shouldn't have to do that," she snapped. "Sometimes it just happens," Lauren said resignedly, "and you just can't stop it." Being sexually assaulted by Bass was a significant setback for Lauren's recovery. She felt more and more hopeless. Suicidal ideation creeped in gradually. She began keeping a razor blade under her mattress. She would pull it across her wrist, daring herself to pull it harder and deeper. If she cut deep enough, her life, and therefore her pain and suffering, would be over. She was haunted by constant flashbacks of her life at the Atkinson house. Whether it was in her sleep or just walking around school, Barbie and Ken may have physically occupied prison cells miles away, but in spirit they'd taken up residency in Lauren's head, and she couldn't expel them no matter what she did. I'd hear Barbie and Kenneth saying, "They wish I was dead, and then I should just kill myself," she said. And I'd think about the sexual abuse. Not just them, but my cousin's husband, too. And I was like, what's next? School counselors became concerned when they noticed cut marks on Lauren's arms. They referred her to a juvenile behavioral center in Tyler. Lauren still tries to enjoy life when she can, though there is always a footnote of sadness. Lauren is a tomboy who has rarely worn dresses since Sabrina bought her clothes when she was a child, but she wore a dress to her prom. She even wore such feminine trappings as heels, earrings, and makeup. She was really looking forward to the occasion. Then, after all that preparation and excitement, her date canceled. Though disappointed, Lauren went to the prom anyway. Lauren usually suffers alone, as she did in the closet, and she sat alone at the prom, sitting and watching the action, dancing with no one. Lauren's experience in high school was often rough. As her therapist Lindsay Jones recalled, sometimes kids at school were mean and some would try to provoke her because she got mad easily and was always ready for a fight. But mostly they would just act like she wasn't there. Sabrina still kept a close eye on Lauren. Sometimes Lauren would invite friends over to the house, but at times they would get on her nerves. If she got bored, she would just go to bed, and they were expected to take the hint. Indeed, friendships were challenging for Lauren. As Jones said, Lauren really pushed people away. She wanted friends, but didn't know what to do with them. Lauren blamed her social difficulties on her fashion sensibility, which was at odds with the country fashions favored by the in crowd at Eustis High School. Lauren is a tomboy who dresses in baggy boy shorts, baseball caps turned sideways, dangling earbuds, flopping untied high-top sneakers. Sometimes she would dress all in one color, one day red, another day green. She wanted to be seen, but not as a sexual object. She wanted an asexual image. Lauren commented on her fashion choices. "There are so many men who've hurt me, which is why I wear boys' clothes all the time. I try to wear clothes that don't really show much, so I'm not out there feeling vulnerable." Lauren's 20th year of life was a memorable one. Her birthday was held at What's Up Family Fun Park, which housed an arcade, laser tag, and go-kart racing in 7 Points, a small town an hour east of Dallas. Its appeal is normally limited to children 12 years of age or under. The party was to start at 2 p.m., right about when her high school alumni would be preparing for the prom. Lauren invited 5 of her friends. At 3 p.m. her friends hadn't showed, and Lauren was hurt. Her eyes filled with tears. Sabrina slid in next to her and pulled her close. Lauren leaned into her. Like many of Lauren's attempts to connect with classmates, her appeals for connection were misplaced, misinterpreted, or ignored entirely. Sabrina had picked up a great deal of experience with this kind of scenario and immediately set about picking up the pieces. She ordered pizzas, presented Lauren with her birthday cake and the presents. The last of the gift bags was from Sabrina. Lauren's mood lifted when she reached into the bag and pulled out a MacBook. Sabrina stood beside her, smiling. "Did that make it all better?" she asked rhetorically. "See, Mama does think about you sometimes." Sabrina reached down and tickled Lauren's ribs. Lauren giggled and pulled away. "Ah, she's happy now," Sabrina said. "It's not everything you hoped for," she said, possibly referring to the absence of Lauren's so-called friends. "But it's better than you expected." Lauren finished high school just as she had experienced it, alone. After the students walked across the stage at the Eustis High Auditorium the previous summer, the majority of them made a beeline to the back hallway, some hugging and some pumping fists. Not Lauren. She stood leaning against a wall, isolated. This was a curse in her life. In both the good times and in bad, isolation and loneliness stalked her. They were often her only companions. In the closet, she experienced isolation in the most extreme and hideous manifestation imaginable. She was liberated from that closet, but no one could liberate her from the loneliness she felt as she struggled and often failed to connect with other people, despite her desire to love and be loved. She wanted intimacy. She just wasn't sure she understood it. Also, on some level, she wasn't sure she was ever going to trust anybody enough to experience maximum closeness. This she felt as she stood alone watching her peers, as they celebrated not only the accomplishment of their scholastic goals, but also the friendships and other intimacies they accumulated throughout their years in high school. In that regard, it was a day of mourning for Lauren. Lauren shifted gears later from sadness to anger. After posing for photos with relatives, Lauren got into Sabrina's SUV and she had a bone to pick with her adoptive mother. "Y'all didn't even cheer for me when I stood up," she said. "Yes, we did," Sabrina said. "I yelled, 'Woo-hoo, that's my girl.' Well, it wasn't very loud. Other people were cheering, but they didn't cheer for me." Sabrina was anxious to shift gears in her own right. "I'm so proud of you," she said to Lauren. "I love you so much. Have I told you that today?" Lauren's lip quivered. A smile fought its way to the surface. Lauren tried in vain to suppress it. If her experience of having her 20th birthday and graduating high school were mixed blessings, the rest of the year was a very anxious time for Lauren, more so than usual. Sabrina was diagnosed with breast cancer. She underwent a mastectomy and was eventually cleared of the disease. It was a difficult journey for the both of them. Lauren sat by Sabrina's side at Baylor University Medical Center in Dallas during several of her 28 chemotherapy treatments and the radiation that followed. It was an experience that required Lauren to grow up because after playing the role of child, she was now Sabrina's caretaker. She frequently made dinner, cleaned the kitchen without being asked, and was understanding when Sabrina lacked the energy to leave the house. Lauren also resolved to enhance her education. She started school behind all the children her age and never entirely caught up. She enrolled herself in a remedial reading and writing class at Trinity Valley Community College in Athens. Her plan was to take remedial math in the following semester if she passed the reading and writing course. It would be challenging. Lauren never learned addition. Doctors adjudged Lauren to be in general good health, especially considering how gravely undernourished she was as a child. There was a serious risk that her physical and psychological development could have been severely impeded. As for her cognitive development, she didn't emerge from the years of abuse entirely unscathed. She was diagnosed with a learning disability called cerebral dysrhythmia. Though she has acquired the disorder in a mild form, her ability to learn has been affected to a pronounced degree. Lauren has seizures that neurologists say are brought on when her body tries to suppress traumatic memories. In a sense, it is like her brain short circuits. Lauren has said that the nightmares are never far away. That is no exaggeration. She can't get a decent night's sleep or get through an entire day without intrusive memories of her years in the closet. She can't always predict when they will be triggered. She could hear a song on the radio she remembers from those years, or it could be the sound of elevator doors shutting. They can leak in gradually, the terror creeping up on her, becoming more and more intense by the second. All the flashbacks involve rape. That was the worst part, she said, sitting against the headboard of her bed and hugging a pillow. I know what they did to me, she said, referring to Barbie and Ken, and they know what they did to me. They can deny it, but we both know what they did to me. Those things include being forced to perform oral sex on both Barbara and Kenneth, being held down spread eagle while Kenneth raped her, being forced to sexually service friends of Barbara's and Kenneth's for free. When the whole family was out, sometimes Lauren would be moved from the closet to a toy box and locked in there until they returned. 6 years as a punching bag and a prostitute. Rarely fed, regularly beaten, routinely raped. Lauren was used as a human appliance by Barbara and Ken Atkinson, and as soon as her utility was no longer needed, she was put back in storage. Because Lauren was too traumatized to testify, sexual assault charges were never pursued. Though Lauren understands and accepts the decision, she still regrets not striking back. She's haunted by the fact that she never fought back during the rapes, or beatings, or jumped out a window, and that when her parents told her to talk dirty or act sexy for a rapist, she did it. Lauren has been told by many people that the lack of defiance was understandable, given that she was only a child and could have been easily prevailed upon by Barbie and Ken. Lauren doesn't buy it. Don't give me that "you were only a kid" crap. It's my fault. It's my fault because I never did anything to stop it. Sadly, nobody can shake this notion from Lauren's mind. The sexual assaults, which were the most egregious of all the offenses committed against Lauren by Barbie, Ken, their friends, and pedophile clients, have not been subjected to prosecution. Barbie and Ken may be in prison, but justice has not been served in its entirety, and this fact will likely vex Lauren for the rest of her life. As for what Lauren intends to do with her life, well, she had some ideas at the age of 20. Her dreams included moving to Austin after finishing her remedial courses and majoring in psychology at the University of Texas. She wants to one day marry and own a home. Sometimes she says she is firm and determined that it's going to happen. Other days, her ambitions are waterlogged by discouragement and pessimism, and she dismisses the fantasy life she envisages as merely that, a fantasy. I'm hoping one day I'll be able to have a normal life, Lauren says. Of course, my life hasn't ever been normal. Lauren knows it won't be easy to achieve that normalcy. The experts know it too. They assumed the odds would be against her as she was evaluated in the hospital after being rescued. She emerged from that closet skeletal and damaged from the outside to the deepest depths of her psyche. Some suspected that there wouldn't be much left of her, that she would emerge like a feral animal, wild and without a conscience. They also speculated that she would live a dysfunctional life, possibly mirroring her mother's to some extent. They also foresaw life in a psychiatric hospital, a life of crime, addiction, and incarceration. And those were what they saw as the safe bets. One day, Lauren attacked a girl in the hallway of her high school. Her punishment was a year of alternative school and 3 months of residential therapy at the Meridell Achievement Center in Austin. This helped her to turn the corner. During her time there, Lauren learned she is not alone. Emotionally, it felt like I was the only person in the world who felt like that, Lauren said. But I looked at these kids and I thought, yeah, maybe mine was worse, but they went through some stuff too. The voices in her head weren't silenced, but Lauren became a stronger person. Mahoney referred her to a new therapist, Lindsay Jones, who specializes in counseling teenagers. Progress was slow. In fact, Lauren said it took her 2 years before she really began to open up. As Jones recalled, in the early days, she would talk to me about her plans to kill herself and having nightmares and flashbacks. She was just going to end it all. She was severely depressed. Jones narrowed down on one issue: control. During Lauren's 6 years in the closet, Barbie and Ken had all the control. Jones told Lauren that they were still controlling her and asked her if she was going to continue letting them do that. Was she going to let them win? Suddenly it was like a light came on inside Lauren. This look came over her face and she realized, this is one thing I have control over, Jones said. I can live or I can die. Lauren chose life. Lauren's 5 siblings were also victimized by Barbara and Kenneth Atkinson. None of them, who ranged in age from 22 months to 10 years at the time of Lauren's rescue, had ever really been to school. They didn't know how to use toothbrushes, eating utensils, or how to wipe themselves after using the toilet. They had also been brainwashed about Lauren. When interviewed by child welfare officials, they had no kind words to say about Lauren. They had been taught to hate her as much as Barbara, and they did. They referred to her as that girl or the girl in the closet. It can't have helped much that Barbara also referred to Lauren as it and the problem. They listed Barbara's reasons for torturing Lauren as justification for doing so. They said that Lauren was mean. They said she was wild. They said she ate all the family's food. 4 of the children were adopted by family in North Texas, and the eldest, Blake Stroll, was raised in a foster home in Abilene. As of Lauren's 20th year of life in 2013, her siblings ranged in age from 14 to 19. Their parents would not allow their real names to be publicized. Unlike Lauren, Blake was able to claim what was left of her childhood without struggling with the psychological and physical disorders that plagued Lauren. Blake moved back to East Texas and reached out to Lauren. She invited her to her daughter's first birthday party. It was the first step Blake took toward reuniting her siblings. I want Lauren to be a part of my life, she said. My brothers and sisters only remember her as the girl in the closet. I just think each of the kids needs to get with Lauren and talk about things and see how we've all changed.
I always wanted to have a relationship with my siblings. There's 6 of us. I did want to get to know them. My social worker said that my siblings wanted to get to know me and asked if I wanted to see them. I said sure. She gave me a time, she gave me a day, and I was ready. On that day, they said, oh, it's too painful. Maybe some other time. I don't understand what's so painful about get to know me. It's time to grow up. I'm trying to have a relationship with my sister, Blake. Blake's gonna have to work really hard for my trust, just like everybody else has. It doesn't matter how cool you are. It's gonna take a lot to earn my trust, no matter who you are.
Did you ever think to tell anyone?
I didn't have the resources because none of us were in school. You know, my family really wasn't around, our family. I was scared. I was scared that, you know, that they might do it to me or that it might make things worse. I wanted to tell people, but I just didn't have the resources and I was scared.
So you weren't going to school?
No, sir. I didn't start school until I was in the 3rd grade, and I had to learn how to write my name. I had to learn my alphabet to just catch up and get at the other speed of kids my age.
Did you have any idea why she was in the closet?
No, sir.
Why she was singled out? Why her instead of you or one of the other children?
There's no logical answer, but the only thing that I can think of is that Barbie immediately after Lauren was born, she gave her up. And when Barbie got Lauren back, that they weren't able to connect. They didn't have that mother-daughter bond. And already with the problems that Barbie had, it just made it worse.
How often did you give her food?
Only a couple of times.
And they found out about it?
Yes, sir.
That's when they blocked the door?
Yes, sir.
Do you feel like you let her down?
Every day.
Do you feel like you failed her?
Every day.
What do you say to yourself about it?
I always tell myself that there's something I could have done. I always feel responsible because I worked so hard to take care of the other kids, but there was nothing I could do for her. It's really hard now trying to have a relationship, even though she's always reassured me that she's told me so many times that, you know, this wasn't your fault. I know that you were a kid too. And it's sincere when she said it to me, but I can't get past it with myself. You know, and I think that's what's keeping us from having a stronger relationship is because we haven't tackled the hard stuff going on between us. You know, we just want to kind of be like friends or sisters, and we need to break down that wall.
Is there a level at which you do blame your sister?
I don't blame her.
You don't blame her at all?
She was a child too. There's something she could have done. I've told her that several times.
The following are some highlights on how she struggles with complications due to PTSD, her relationships, and other aspects of everyday life.
Every day I relive my past. It doesn't ever end.
I think when you say you relive it, it's not like a distant memory for you. It's like right there again. This isn't a distant memory, correct?
No.
Tell me about that.
It's like I'm that child again. Every day. I can feel the pain and the torture that I go through. It's real every day. A nightmare is realistic. You feel like you're there. I'm paralyzed from it because I can't wake up from it.
During her nightmares, Lauren has reenacted the sexual abuse. I could hear her grunting, so I came into the room and watched her twist and turn in a sexual way. And you could just hear her counting. 1, 2, 3. She stopped at 13. When I asked her about the dream and the counting, she said Kenneth and his friends raped her. And it was 13 men. Lauren's night terrors happen almost every night. I can't touch Lauren when she's having a night terror. If you do, she will hurt you. The first night terror that I encountered, I tried to wake her up and she got on top of me and tried to choke me.
She normally doesn't sleep next to me because she's scared too.
It's like she's reliving each day over and over.
Well, Janae, thank you so much for being here, and I really appreciate it. And now, so just so people understand, when we talk about a nightmare, we're talking about dreams with vivid and disturbing content, and these occur during REM sleep. They usually involve an immediate awakening and really good recall of imagery. Night terrors occur during non-REM sleep, so you're not as deep asleep during these times, and they induce terror or panic in the sleeper, and it causes them to scream and shout. They may sleepwalk, thrash about and around into bed, and they only vaguely remember it. When she experiences this during the night or when you're asleep, she can get very out of control, right?
Yes, she can get very violent or reenactment of what she's seeing. You can't see what she sees, you only see what she's doing. And sometimes you want to wake her, you want it to stop because you don't want to watch her go through that pain, but you know that you can't because then you become that person.
Right. And are you fearful that she's going to injure herself?
Yes.
During these times? Because there are times that she's up and out of bed, right?
Yes.
She's moving about.
Yes.
And her eyes are open?
Her eyes are completely open. I have to, before we go to bed, I normally put everything away that's sharp, anything that she can hurt herself on. I literally have to baby-proof the house.
Right. And do you have recollection of this the next day?
No.
Nada. And what did you think in the beginning when you would find her in the closet floor?
I thought, okay, maybe it's just a safety thing. Maybe it's just she needs to be somewhere close and tight. If we are somewhere that doesn't have a closet, she will go to the shower, turn on the scalding hot water, and sleep in there. One day she had slept in the shower with the hot water running for about 4 hours, and she had blisters because the water was so hot.
The water running on her?
Running on her body.
And was she awake?
No, she was completely asleep.
This is from a video apologia Barbara recorded in prison for Lauren.
First thing I'd like to say is I am so sorry. If I could take it back, I would. But I can't do that. All I can do is just explain what I know. First off, it was not you. You may not believe this. And I will fully understand. But I've always loved you. But that love hurt. And it hurt you. The right words to say to you, to explain. But I did. I don't think there are any words. I can't go out.
That's it. That's the apology, and she was too upset to finish.
I
feel so bad for her. What's your reaction the first time you saw that?
I was super angry that she said that she never meant to hurt me and she was so sorry, and if she would take it back. Well, I bet you would, because you're in prison now, so.
You question the sincerity of that.
There was not a tear in her eye. That was so fake.
You can spend the rest of your life waiting for somebody to give you something they don't have. And I can tell you that my assessment of those people is they're seriously deranged individuals. And, you know, there are certain core things that you hope are built into people, and one of them is empathy. And my definition of empathy is the ability to understand how someone else is feeling. And as I look at this woman, I believe that she lacks empathy. I think I've certainly not diagnosed her, but I would suspect that sociopath would be on my short list of considerations. And watching her make this so-called apology, it was all about her. It wasn't about you, it was about her. And the arrogance of her leaning back and rocking in the chair and saying, you know, love can hurt. And I just wanted to kick the screen in. But I recognize that she is a very mentally ill person. I hope at some point that you find it within you to forgive her, not for her, but for you. And when I say that, it's when you are locked up with a person with hatred and bitterness and anger, it's like you're just locked into a bond with them. It's like you got your hands up and you're intertwined with them, and you're just right here, and so they're right there, and she can control you from prison by engaging you in bitterness and anger and hatred. And I'm not saying you're ready to turn that loose at this point, but I do want you to understand that forgiving someone doesn't mean that you're saying what they did was okay. Forgiving them says, look, that's going to be between you and God. But I'm not going to spend another second of my life invested in you. You're not worth that to me. I'm not going to do it. And that's the reason I hope you do that. And if there is a part of you that blames your sister for this, if there's a part of you that blames yourself, and I know there is, it's so easy for us to stand on the outside and look in. But when you were 2, she was 5. And abusers' number one tool is isolation. You were isolated. Your little brothers and sisters were isolated. And all you know is what you're shown and what you're taught. And if they tell you she's bad and she's where she's supposed to be because she's bad, and you have no yardstick against whether to measure bad gets this treatment, this treatment, this treatment, this treatment, you have no way of knowing what's normal and what's not. There was a normal in your house that was highly toxic, highly pathological, but you didn't go over to the neighbor's house, you didn't go somewhere that it was light and sunny and bright and healthy and have that to compare. So it's very difficult to understand that. And you're 5 and 6 and 7 years old. And so I do hope the time comes when you two sit down and talk about that.
Lauren struggled with bullying in college.
I went to college. I graduated.
When you got into college, and this is just something that absolutely boggles my mind, but when you got into college, you actually had to stop going to that school because you were bullied and harassed, correct?
Yes, sir.
By who and for what?
Some players on the football team read my story. And they made fun of me and bullied me and harassed me because of it.
What did they say to you?
That I liked it when I got raped, and if just things like that.
Yeah, and when they read your story, they know that this happened for a 6-year period from the ages of 2 until 8, and that you lived in a closet, starved, beaten, raped, horrifically tortured. And so that's their way of bullying you, that you like this and that you're some kind of bad person for it. Were those people ever held to account?
They missed a couple of football games.
When you saw what happened to them, where they missed a couple of games, what do you say to yourself about that?
I was pretty upset that they only got to miss a couple of games, and I'm in my dorm room not able to come out because they're still harassing me.
So it didn't really stop?
No. The football coach apologized for his teammates. They did not apologize.
Did that affect the way you felt about yourself?
Yeah.
Other than angry? I mean, what did you say?
that I'm not good enough for anything. I would never be anything in my life. Just
because of what's happened to you?
yes, sir.
Even though you know you didn't choose that, even though you know you were the victim, that causes you to say that to yourself. Why? Help me understand.
Because I blame myself.
And when you say you blame yourself, was there something that you did that you shouldn't have done or didn't do that you should have done?
I feel like I could have ran away when I had the chance, or just did different things.
And if you look back on that and you've seen some of the pictures and the tape that's reminded you of this today, intellectually you realize that you were a small, malnourished, beaten prisoner child at the time. You know that intellectually, right?
Yes, sir.
But emotionally you still feel differently.
Yes, sir.
In 2018, Lauren's life took another dark turn. This involved incidents of rape, only this time it was Lauren who was the perpetrator. In December, she was taken into custody and placed in jail with bail set at $10,000. She had been engaged in a sexual relationship with a 14-year-old girl she met through her Facebook page, which has since been deleted. The girl told officers that she had been in a relationship with Kavanaugh for 2 months and that it was consensual. Kavanaugh was arrested after admitting to the affair. Police suspect there may be other victims. Statistically speaking, the likelihood of this occurring is high. Victims of childhood sexual abuse often end up offending as adults. There's no such thing as statutory rape in the Texas Penal Code. Both common rape and statutory rape are charged in the same way, both being defined as sexual assault, which is classified as a second-degree felony. The punishment for second-degree felonies is 2 to 20 years in prison with an optional fine up to $10,000. After Lauren pays her dues, she will live as a registered sex offender, quite possibly for the rest of her natural life. Restrictions she will face as such will include being barred from living near a school or a park, and she won't be permitted to have a smartphone or any other kind of phone that is capable of sending photographs or accessing the internet. In fact, Lauren won't be allowed to use any kind of device that can access to the internet, which includes Sony PlayStation or Xbox. She could only access the internet on a computer programmed with software that restricts access to websites deemed inappropriate. If she violates any of these conditions, the state will know because she will have to undergo regular polygraph exams. Her likelihood of being acquitted is nil since she has confessed her involvement with the girl to the police. Her story wasn't supposed to end this way. It's a cruel irony that the girl whose life was destroyed by adults who violated her when she was a child will now be punished for a sex crime committed against a minor. But then how could she have known or understood the difference from right and wrong while growing up in the Atkinsons' home? It doesn't justify the crime she has committed. She has just become a person who was twisted and broken under the damage done, left her barely functional as a human being. Certainly, it was bad decision-making that led to her having a sexual liaison with an underage girl. But should it come as a surprise when she was raised by Barbie and Ken Atkinson? Isn't Lauren Kavanaugh's distorted sense of morality the handiwork of human monsters?